Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first podcast of DailyNewsCollective.com's Lest We Forget. I'm your host, John Bound. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have been a reporter. I have been a public radio disc jockey. I have been an actor. I've been behind the scenes on film and commercials. I've operated a camera, editing equipment. I've been a musician, and I was raised by a man who was fortunate enough to have won a Peabody Award in broadcast journalism. I owe it all to my father, my mother, my family and friends, and all the people that I've met along the way. I've created the DailyNewsCollective.com because of my frustration with mainstream media. I've noticed that stories come and go, and I've also noticed that stories get swept under the rug a little too much. So I want to weekly, every Friday, produce a podcast that brings you a comprehensive look at the past week and bring a guest in each week to comment on everything that went down. Now, my guests will vary. I'm not really stuck in any one place as far as my outlook. I will be speaking with musicians, I'll be speaking with politicians, I'll be speaking with alternative media pundits, as it were. I may even speak with mainstream media pundits. Who knows? I'll be speaking with esoteric folks, people on the outskirts of what we would call reality. I will be speaking with people on the inside of what I would call the problem. Whistleblowers, if you will. So without further ado, let's go ahead and smash that champagne bottle into the ship and declare bon voyage as we set sail on the first premiere podcast of Lest We Forget. This week, beginning June 1st, 2015, the week begins with the NSA spying provisions in the Patriot Act to expire. Rand Paul filibustered on the floor, caused a big ruckus, and declared that we can catch terrorists using the Constitution. Meanwhile, the federal government had to halt all collection of U.S. citizens' phone records within 6 months, and tension boiled between the two Kentucky senators, Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, as Mitch McConnell fought for the USA Freedom Act, which many people have said might be worse than the Patriot Act, or at least just a shell game. The Freedom Act turns private telecommunication companies into agents of state security. That means Verizon is now overseeing all of your records, as they were before. It turns private telecommunication companies into depositories of pre-crime data for future use of state security agencies. And it also provides liability protection for the telecommunication firms who store all of our data. Also on that Monday, the Taliban Five, the 5 Taliban leaders who were exchanged for Bo Bergdahl, the deserter in Afghanistan, we later found out, the CIA talked Qatar into giving them a 6-month extension in order to hold those prisoners. On Tuesday, a citizen journalist discovered that the FBI is involved in a fake corporate cover-up of their surveillance planes, which flew over at least 30 cities in 11 states. The FBI had previously admitted to flying surveillance flights over Baltimore during the Freddie Gray riots. And on that same Tuesday, June the 2nd, an anti-corruption group said that FIFA president had to resign, so Sepp Blatter resigned. Even though he had rejected earlier in the day, he finally resigned after his vice president resigned. They're all embroiled in a corruption scandal that is being focused on by new Attorney General Lynch. On the heels of the gigantic FBI surveillance story, police officers killed a possible terror suspect in Boston. A suspect that had been surveilled for 24 hours a day was killed by police, and FBI officers were on the scene. They gunned down Osama Rahim, who had a knife in his hand. Rahim's brother told a different story, said he was just waiting for the bus, but the FBI claimed that Osama Rahim intended on taking out Muhammad cartoon artists in the near future. On Tuesday, June 2nd, there were reports of a new study that found increased risk to the central nervous system due to anti-anxiety and painkiller medications. It was discovered by European researchers, and they found that it weakened impulse control. Later that day, Obama signed the USA Freedom Act on June 2nd. It cleared a Senate hurdle, and Senate hawks fought to cause a blackout over the amendments. On Wednesday, an assistant pastor was mysteriously shot by an Oklahoma State trooper as he walked away from floodwaters. He appears on video to rush the officer. Part of the video is gone. The family is in total disbelief. They say the officer's life was not in danger, and he was a pastor who would have never have harmed anybody. As the Mexican elections wind down on Wednesday, June 3rd, another Mexican congressional candidate was attacked and killed by armed men, the fourth politician to be slain before Sunday's elections. Cartels burned thousands of ballots as voter corruption and fraud continue to take its toll on Mexico. Also on Wednesday, Hillary Clinton campaign causes cancellation of free events for children. Roosevelt Island community boosters don't see when Hillary will have an opportunity to speak with the actual residents, as an annual event intended to help Roosevelt Island children was canceled. Also on Wednesday, June 3rd, as we draw closer to July 15th, the beginning date of Jade Helm 15, military drills were held in Flint, Michigan that frightened residents who knew nothing about them. Sounds of cannons and explosions. They say it went from a peaceful day to a war zone. The Army and the Air Force warned drills might disturb residents, but they did it just before they began the drills. They will increase their helicopter traffic until June 11th in that part of southeastern Michigan. Also on Wednesday, a hurdle was cleared by the California Senate to pass a bill allowing illegal aliens to register for Obamacare. California Senate voted 28-11 in favor. Cost of the amended bill could be as high as $175 million, and at this point it still needs to reach Governor Brown's desk. June 4th into June 5th, a major data breach confounds the U.S. government. Millions of government workers were hit by a data hack, a major data breach that officials suspect China may be responsible for. On June 5th, another racial profiling of customers and employees lawsuit hit CVS. That CVS employees were trained to track minority customers and that they had a shop and frisk mentality. Also on June 5th, female Viagra backed by the FDA. This little pink pill gets the FDA recommendation. It works from the neck up rather than the waist down as it applies to Viagra. It looks pretty good that it will be legalized, as the recommendation vote was 18-6. And the Dennis Hastert sex abuse scandal continues to develop as the sister comes forward of the equipment manager that worked with then coach Dennis Hastert. He was indicted last week for withdrawals tied to the alleged cover-up. Individual A, the one actually named in the indictment, has yet to be identified. Now joining me to go over these stories of the week, lest we forget, and his professional opinion on the stories involving pharmaceuticals, is Jon Rappoport. He's worked as a freelance investigative reporter for over 30 years. He's the author of 3 explosive collections: The Matrix Revealed, Exit from the Matrix, and Power Outside the Matrix. He's written articles on politics, health, media, culture, and art for LA Weekly, Spin Magazine, Stern, Village Voice, Nexus, CBS, Health Watch, and other newspapers and magazines in the U.S. and Europe. In 1994, Jon ran for a seat in the U.S. Congress from the 29th District in L.A. After 6 months of campaigning on a very small budget, he garnered 20% of the vote, running against an incumbent who had occupied his seat for 20 years. Jon has lectured extensively all over the U.S. on the question, who runs the world and what can we do about it? Since 2000, Jon has operated largely away from the mainstream because, as he puts it, my research was not friendly to the conventional media. Thanks, Jon Rappoport, for joining us here on Lest We Forget.
Good to be here, John.
So, at the beginning of the week, NSA spying provisions and the Patriot Act expired, and then it morphed into this other monstrosity, the USA Freedom Act. They're saying, Rand Paul was saying we can use the Constitution to catch terrorists. What kind of shell game is this?
I think it's several shell games at once, John. First of all, we've got 3 trade treaties on the table all of a sudden. And there's the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's the Euro-U.S. Trade Pact. And there's another one that I just became aware of a couple of days ago that has a lot to do with sharing personal records of people's communication, medical records, who knows what, globally, internationally, all over the world with agencies. And then we have the, Freedom Act. Well, this is intentional. I mean, to pile on all these things at once, the idea is that there'd just be too much to really cover. People will know nothing about really anything here, and they'll all pass through eventually. So, besides which, this temporary stoppage of NSA spying, which I don't really even believe is stoppage at all, is just, 24 hours, 48 hours. I mean, these agencies plan for contingencies. They have multiple repetitive, redundant systems of spying. It's not just one thing. So the optimism about, great success here is really misapplied. I mean, this is ridiculous stuff here.
Yeah, and they plan a name on it, just like the Patriot Act, called the USA Freedom Act. Later on in the week, we found out, and we've known this for a while, but it became more apparent after a citizen journalist was monitoring in Minnesota, was monitoring FBI low-flying planes that were constantly surveilling the area in Minnesota. And then it turned out that after the Associated Press dug into it, that there were the FBI had been flying over at least 30 cities in 11 states. And so now that's coming to fruition. Probably won't go much of anywhere as the FBI's corruption just continues to increase, along with the DEA's corruption and CIA and so on and so forth. But another example of surveillance gone awry.
Yeah. I mean, multiple agencies doing it in multiple ways, all at the same time. So what do you have here? I mean, we're talking about total surveillance all the time, as much as possible. And as Snowden pointed out, and he's not alone in this, the result is that you clog the system. So if the objective was really to catch terrorists, would you really want to be trying to analyze 20 billion separate pieces of information every few days to catch terrorists? I mean, it doesn't work.
Well, and that's what's so mind-boggling is that, let's say you or I, we had to take a job as one of these NSA surveillance, if that's a word, surveillance experts. And so, let's say I'm surveilling you, and I'm spending, from the time I get up till I clock out, watching your life. What about my life? What about
life?
What about their lives? What about living your life, the pursuit of happiness? What happened to that?
We can see that the objective was never to catch terrorists, because, like I say, if that were the program, they're doing it completely the wrong way by capturing everything on everybody. It just destroys the system of analysis. So then you have to move over to the conclusion that what they're really doing is just simply spying on everybody all the time. That's what they wanted to do in the first place. And this specter of terrorist attack is just the occasion that allows them to rationalize for the public why they're doing it. But the real objective is to monitor and therefore control the behavior, the actions, even the thought, certainly the speech of people, to control society.
A massive psyop, yeah. The TSA had failed 95% of airport security tests, so they're completely useless.
Yeah, and they were bringing bombs and weapons through, not just little tiny stuff in tiny bottles or anything. So we know it's a total fraud. I talked to a guy who was involved with security at Israeli airports. This must have been a couple of years ago now. And he basically said to me, look, we consider this a priority job. And so we know how to do it. And the way that the U.S. is doing it is just ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work. There are ways of doing it that are far less intrusive and give you better results. But the U.S. doesn't seem to want to listen to anybody else on it, so they just keep on with this crazy system that they've got going.
They've gone PSYOP crazy. Yeah, I did a report on the CIA and their involvement in a program called Operation Phoenix back in Vietnam. And it was very interesting how this was kind of a pilot for the way that they treated the Vietnamese citizens, how they terrorized them and using counter-terrorist techniques in order to get information out of them and also quell public opinion and have them under their boot. And it's just morphed into this monstrosity. Sepp Blatter, who had to resign later on in the week, at first he was going to fight for his job in the new presidential election, but then the vice president, he stepped down immediately because he didn't want to be tied to the corruption. And so it turned into this 15 minutes of distraction when, meanwhile, the bankers that caused the 2008 financial crisis and were also responsible for LIBOR, which nobody wants to talk about LIBOR, they quietly gave out the fines and slapped them on the wrist, and even though they had changed the interest rates globally to make billions of dollars.
Yeah, right out of the box, the new attorney general decides to go after an international soccer organization. What's that?
Yeah.
I mean, ESPN has been trying valiantly, and I mean valiantly, to promote the idea that Americans love soccer and that we really want to watch 90 plus minutes of, one team scoring one goal and maybe the other team scores another goal. I mean, I don't understand the sport. So, where everything that happens in some remote nation that has to do with their soccer team is suddenly vital to the American sporting viewer and the scene here. And, to me, it's just yet another kind of little branch on the globalist tree, is this attempt to convince Americans that soccer is really a major sport in America. And so as her first action out of the box, she goes after FIFA. I mean, I compare that to Obama's first shot out of the box. Here he's got even his own advisors when he was first elected in 2008 telling him, look, the first thing on the agenda has to be jobs, because that's where everybody's glued, because people are losing jobs like crazy and they're living in tents and people can't find jobs and so forth. And he says, no, the first thing is going to be this protracted struggle to pass this monstrosity called Obamacare. I've decided that's the first item on the agenda. Furthest thing from most people's minds. So here we have the Attorney General essentially doing that as her first order of business. Yet another distraction, as you say, from the Wall Street criminals. And I'm sure we can expect more of the same out of the DOJ.
Mm-hmm. But then the next story that came out that was kind of, it seemed more propaganda than anything, was that police officers and the FBI had been surveilling this possible terror suspect in Boston. And he apparently, according to them, attacked them with a giant knife, and so they just shot him down. According to the FBI, going to start attacking these Muhammad cartoonists that are popping up here in the U.S. So they shot him down. On the heels of the FBI plane surveillance information that came out, it was almost within 24 hours.
Yeah. I mean, you could easily look at this as a way of the FBI saying, we're doing great work here because we just nailed this terrorist. Yeah. Don't worry about the fact that we're spying on millions of people with airplanes that have nothing to do with terrorism. Doesn't matter. So this pattern of endless distraction, look at this, don't look at that, that's not important, but this over here is important. I mean, this is what the news is. Mm-hmm. This is how the news is built. Yep. And, of course, audience reaction confirms that, because you can program the American people or the people of any nation to watch sensational news stories on television and to tune into them. So it pays off in terms of ratings and ad revenues and all of that sort of thing for the networks. But it's basically all distraction all the time. Because if you just said, stop the music, look, here are 5 incredibly important stories that don't go away. They're chronic, they're endemic, something has to be done about them, and here they are. So how about covering these? Now, we've covered that before. People are not really interested in it anymore. We've done that already countless times, et cetera, et cetera. Right. This is what actual reporters, however many in the mainstream remain that are really curious, honorable, run into with their editors all the time. Mm-hmm. You go into an editor, I mean, as a reporter for a long time, and having spoken with many reporters, I know this routine, like the back of my hand. You go into an editor and you say, I want to cover this story. I want to cover medically caused death in America. Yeah, I've got the studies. I got the numbers. It's unbelievable. This is a page 1 story. We could dig into this like Watergate for months on end. And, we could print 2 editions of this paper every day on the newsstands, and people would be grabbing them up like hotcakes because this is unbelievable. No, we've covered that before. We've covered the fines on big drug companies like Glaxo and Pfizer. People are tired of this. They don't want to hear about it, and forget about it unless you want to lose your job.
Right. And that brings us to the next story, which is, I'm sure, you've been probably one of the biggest stories you've probably heard in months. And, this is something you've been talking about for years. And finally, mainstream media, due to a study that was done in, I believe it was Germany, they're saying that painkillers, anti-anxiety medications are linked to increased risk of homicide.
I mean, and as you say, it's a blurb for a day because it's going to go away. And now if you can double back, after Sandy Hook, Obama came out with this high-flying program of brain mapping and community medical health centers all over America, and increased screenings of young children for mental disorders, blah, 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 that this is somehow going to solve the problem, help solve the problem of these, quote, random mass shootings. So here we have evidence that the very drugs that are used to treat mental patients or people who are diagnosed with any mental disorder increases the risk of suicide and homicide, which is supposed to be the thing that this program is going to solve. So this is totally backwards. This is Obama claiming, again, that he has knowledge of something that he absolutely knows nothing about, as he does many times. He's now, he's certainly a climate expert because he knows that, quote, the science is settled on that whole issue. And he knows everything about global economics because he knows that what's really in the TPP, the secret treaty, is not what people are saying it is. And this is a really good deal. So he's an expert on that, too. Right. And he's an expert on everything, that he touches, which is not unique to him. Every president pretty much claims the same thing, and every news anchor tries to pretend that he or she knows what they're talking about when they don't. But again, here's an instance where you've got one of the main causes of people committing murders and suicides in America and other countries, which is psychiatric medications. And it rates one story for one day, and nobody will ever follow up on it.
Mm-hmm. And it won't have enough of an effect or an impact on people in general. There's going to be a very slim minority of people that are going to turn to their loved ones who are on these things and say, look at this article. Fourth politician has been slain before Sunday's elections by the cartels. Thousands of ballots were burned. This is another story that you got to dig into the news that day, and you really don't see it. And meanwhile, our borders are wide open. They've just announced, I think it was about 3,400 people, I think, of felons that they released on the streets once again, illegal alien felons onto the streets of America. Meanwhile, everything's fine. Congressional candidates are being gunned down as they kiss babies and walk amongst the people, in Mexico. And it's horrific.
Yeah, it is horrific. And you would think that a president of the United States, mm-hmm. certainly an attorney general, would say, look, we have a violence problem here, right? Yeah. So we have to go where that is. Where is it actually happening? Instead of, okay, look, we have to take all guns away from everybody except the cops. Where is the violence really occurring? Who's doing it, the bulk of the violence? What is happening with gangs? Who do these gangs work for? Why are they, transporting and selling large quantities of drugs? Oh, you mean it goes back to the cartels? Oh, so in other words, we've got gangs that are working in collaboration with the cartels.
Which goes back to the big banks.
Yeah, and the big banks that are laundering the money. I see. Okay, so now we're starting to get a handle on what's happening here. So let me go on television as the president and inform the people that this is not just a problem. This is the destruction of safety in the United States. Safety for ordinary citizens. So we have to do something serious about this. We have to target that with actual workable solutions. Mm-hmm. We've seen this developing for 30 or 40 years now. So you think by now somebody would come up with some kind of a plan, but no. Instead, we're just going to let that ride. Well, I've covered this kind of issue in many venues, including medical. And my conclusion is when a high-ranking or even, commander-in-chief knows about a chronic, heavy problem that's been around for decades and it's public knowledge and it's no secret, and then does nothing about it, that speaks to intention. Mm-hmm. That's not, oh, I forgot about that, or I just made a mistake. No, that's intention, to allow the problem to continue, to encourage it to continue. That's on purpose. Mm-hmm. And anybody who doesn't think so is just living in rainbows and marshmallows. Well, because that's how these things work.
We have a delusional president who's proclaiming that he doesn't divide the nation, that we're number one, that he raised the bar again, that we're number one and respected amongst all the other countries in the world, which is completely false. His information, his poll numbers are wrong, big time. It's actually 53% of Americans, a poll back in 2014, Gallup poll, said that 53% of Americans believe that that Obama is not respected by world leaders. And, he spied on the Brazilian president, he spied on Merkel, and he's lost respect by Israel as a result of the Iran deal, and the Saudi Arabians, who a lot of us don't have respect for anyway. But it's a delusional. It's madness what we're watching. And the other part of it is that we still believe there's still plenty of people that have so much faith and trust in the government, And the fact of the matter is that the fact that we even call him a president is just a big illusion, because here we are fast-tracking the TPP, which is going to be the finalization of NAFTA and GATT, and it's going to finally be it will be a global one-world government by law, legally. And we have been a corporatocracy since NAFTA and GATT. We're just growing into this corporatocracy over decades, and now it'll be finalized within the next few months if he's successful. And this illusion that we have a president, that we have an administration, that we have a Congress, I see that as the next great breach of trust or awareness amongst the majority of Americans, because it's going to have to become apparent to everyone that you can't, your freedoms, your rights are no longer valid. You have to pay this fee to the corporations. When you go on the internet, that will be controlled by the corporations. It already is to some degree.
Yeah, it has been for quite a while, and it keeps on building and building and building. It's a fundamental delusion, as you say, about where people get their information and knowledge, because there's still a huge number of people that get their knowledge from mainstream news, from media corporations. And the whole job of these media corporations, aside from endless distraction, is to promote the notion of a continuous government that is acting on behalf of the people in some fashion. That this is a continuing thread of history that started way back in the late 18th century, and that it persists to this day. And of course, that is completely false. It's been false for a very long time. Mm-hmm. But because of the way television operates purely on the basis of the continuous flow of hypnotic information that the viewer then accepts passively as being fact and truth and so forth. So all you have to do every day on television is say the government did this, the government says that, the government is going to do this, the government insists upon this and so forth. And after a while, people, hypnotically on a level of mind control, believe that there is this continuous operation called the government, which is always striving to do the right thing, when that is a completely false impression.
They've been completely rewired. And, it's always, as you get older, you always look at the next generation and shake your head. But they talk about a brainwashed generation, and there's really nothing they can do, not to mention brainwash, but, physically, emotionally, spiritually, just completely rewired. And, the hubris of the politicians knows no bounds. And here we see this train wreck of Hillary Clinton, whose polls have gone down at least 9% here recently. No one can admit to trusting her. She just spoke in a half-empty hall about the plight of African Americans. Which, come on, and this lady who's getting 20. In order to speak to her, you have to pay her $2,500. She told one of her
right.
Some lady was in line the other day and said, "Can I get an autograph?" And she told her on camera, to go to the back of the line. But she was she was planning a stop on her campaign on Roosevelt Island in New York, and in order for this to happen, they had to cancel this free event for children that they have every year with, free rides, hot dogs, a blood drive, canceled in order for her to speak. The Daily Caller said, this is a good look for Hillary Clinton, but why stop there? Wherever she goes, she should find a little kid with a cookie and slap it out of his hand. Instead of kissing babies, take away their pacifiers and make them cry. Her base will love it because they despise children. And, the depth of what you and I know about Hillary Clinton as a human being, and what's on the surface for most Americans, why does she continue to campaign? I mean, she's had to deal with all of these issues that show that she's backstabbing, double dealing, email erasing. You know, the Clinton campaign is this mafioso style organization that went down and reaped the rewards of what happened in Haiti, and they've reaped the rewards in other countries in North Africa, and you know, not to mention the outlandish speaking fees that she gets and that her husband gets. And then on top of everything else, we've got Bill Clinton, who, you know, now it's come to fruition. I hope some people realize just how responsible Bill Clinton was. Now, Bill Clinton gave us, he gave us our cake so we could eat it too during his time in office. And, you know, the economy, it was a good economy. I had a really good job at that time, which went away as soon as Bush showed up. But so a lot of people that were around and were working look at that time fondly because of the money that we had that was available in our economy. There were actual real middle-class jobs that were available. But Bill Clinton, beyond Monica Lewinsky, talk about a distraction, Bill Clinton is the guy responsible for really creating the prison industrial complex. And there are more Americans in jail, in prison, than have ever been in human history. And he fast-tracked that. And you know, it's one thing to say, well, you know, maybe it's the laws that put these people behind bars and all that. No, he's created this prison industrial complex that shells out all of these products just like a third world nation. They're building all of these things that we use every day in prison and paying these guys nothing. And he'll be, for the first time in history, you know, the first husband, the first man, you know. So Hillary gets in there, Bill Clinton's president again.
I was just reading a piece the other day about how prison labor is being used to create goat cheese that's being sold at Whole Foods.
Wow.
60 cents an hour.
Yeah.
You know, and other products coming online as well. So, yeah, I mean, the Clintons, what can you say about them? That is good. I can't think of anything that's good. And she looks like a dinosaur, you know, clomping through downtown Manhattan or something. A remnant of a family that stood for nothing but absolute corruption, continues to stand for that. And she's sitting there with her advisors saying, well, what do we do? How do we change the image? And so they're looking at her, looking at each other, lying to her face, pretending that everything is okay, when, you know, the cat is out of the bag on the Clintons. So whether she runs, wins, loses, whatever, I mean, it's a disaster.
Yeah. On Tuesday, there are these military drills in Flint, Michigan. Now, Jade Helm 15 is supposed to begin July 15th and end on September 15th. And they never mentioned Michigan. And they went into Flint, Michigan the other day and just started lobbing off explosives at this high school, this empty high school, in the east side of Flint, Michigan, southeastern Flint. And the local city council hadn't warned anybody about it. And so these people were completely frightened out of their minds, didn't know what was going on. And so what's your take on Jade Helm?
Well, this recent incident in Michigan, to me, illustrates, you know, go into a neighborhood or a city or a place that's been decimated by globalism, treaties like NAFTA and so forth and so on. Heavy crime areas, devastation, poverty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Corruption, mismanagement, theft of public monies, all that sort of thing. Just the kind of place where you might expect that possibly somewhere down the line, you're going to see people rioting and rebelling and so forth. And let's stage a military drill there. Let's show a military presence to the people as a warning note. And let's also do a lot of research and investigation while we're carrying out the drill so that we can see what the neighborhoods are like, what we would be up against if we had to go house to house and street to street with soldiers and weapons and tanks and God knows what. Mm-hmm. So I think that's certainly part of the program, part of the manual. But the rest of it is, posse comitatus, forget it, that's ridiculous, it doesn't apply anymore. Military can be everywhere, anywhere we want them to be. We'll call it a drill, but you're going to see soldiers on the streets. Get used to it. That's what's happening. And there's larger numbers of people who want to see soldiers on the streets in certain places because of riots and protests and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I just see this as the militarization of the country. It's underway. It's been underway for some time. And so the decision has been made. Let's be, upfront about it to a degree. Let's just show ourselves, be there, do our work, carry out the drills, leak information about the drills that we want people to know. We want people to know that we can put them under the gun. And there's nothing they can do about it.
Yep. Yeah. And the only thing that I can add to it is, we're well aware now of the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases. And as far as their actual plan, how they're going to roll this out, it could be one of four things. I don't see how it would make sense to nuke all of us, go underground, and then, spend the rest of your days underground. So, it could be a civil war situation in order to get us used to the new technocratic laws that will arise out of the TPP. And then to place us all, take the people that are making everyone else aware, put them somewhere else, and put under control. And the pursuit of happiness needs to be turned into the pursuit of obedience. It's. I guess most of us are just waiting for the next election with just a smidge of hope that something's out there, but knowing how the system is, it is a corporatocracy, and the sooner people realize that, it seems insurmountable.
Well, if you put the paradigm that way, it is insurmountable. But I don't look at it that way anymore, because I gave up on politics, American type politics, 1964 when Lyndon Johnson came in, and nothing that's happened since has convinced me that anything was going to change, no matter which political party was in power. So to me, it's all about decentralization of power. It's about nullification of federal laws when you can do it. It's about innovating all kinds of solutions, which means that people have to revolutionize their own minds and imaginations and come up with answers that haven't been thought of before. It's about going at this from many different vectors. Yeah, it's about spreading information, but it's about much more than that. There is if you look at it like two tanks looking at each other across the street, they've got a tank that's like 20 stories high, and we've got one that looks like a toy. So I don't look at it as that sort of, opposition. Or you could look at it like, 17 armored vehicles pull up to some guy's house who owns a shotgun. What's going to happen? Right. If you look at it from that point of view, which a lot of people do, then it's over. Then you may as well just say, forget it.
Yep.
But I look at it from this point of view. How much propaganda and mind control has it taken on a continuous basis to drive people into a state of passive acceptance? It's taken trillions of dollars and decades and decades and decades. What does that say? It says that there's something alive inside each individual human being that is extraordinarily alive and electric and vital and real, that needs to have that tonnage of mind control thrown at that person in order to render them passive, which tells you something about what is really going on in human life. That the battle is never over. Even when it's already over, it's never over, because looking at the long term here, people who are afraid of what's going to happen in the next 5 years, I got to just dismiss them outright. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. It's like, come on, are you really that worried about your own life and death that all you can see is 5 years? Because if that's all you can look at, then you're going to come to the conclusion that, there's either no hope, or you have to get into some high mountain out in remote territory and build a cottage out there or something like that. That's all you got. Grow your own food. That's it. There's no other way to look at it if you're only looking that short term. But if you see yourself as more than just a physical body that's going to expire in the next 20 years, in which case, why are you so worried about the next 5 years? I mean, then you begin to look at a larger picture, much larger picture, that you have to flesh out yourself to understand what this whole conflict really is on a much higher level than the way it's being portrayed in media or in conventional circles. You're looking at something that's much bigger, much different, much deeper, much higher, much longer in terms of a time span than you could possibly imagine. I mean, just look at what happened to antiquity during the Dark Ages. We're talking about centuries and centuries and centuries of incredible suppression in Europe, for example. And we're talking about many people who at the time made up their minds that that was the end of the world, that nothing could ever come out of that except, destruction, more destruction. But yet that wasn't the case.
Right. And then
it was not the case.
Renaissance happened.
And it's not the case now. Mm-hmm. But you have to take the long view, otherwise you're sunk.
Right. And that human spirit and the human will and the human inventiveness, even if they took out 90% of the population and they all went underground like moles and lived with their families, eventually the seed of humanity would grow in a few of those children down there, and they would probably rebel against the power hoarders that we dealt with and overtake them. It just you can't stop common sense. You just can't stop the will of humanity, especially with the outlook that you're talking about.
Yeah, I see it that way myself, over the long term. So therefore, I have an ultimately positive outlook on things.
Mm-hmm. Speaking, let's not even speak to the generations that have witnessed this. Let's talk to, say, somebody that's 12, 13 years old right now. Okay,
so somebody who's 12, 13 years old right now probably knows they still have this thing called imagination, because it hasn't been beaten or ground out of them yet. And what is imagination? It's being able to see the possibility of something else that doesn't already exist coming into being in the world, and seeing it as real or even more real than what already exists in the world. And what is that possibility that the imagination sees? Well, it isn't one thing. It's thousands and millions of different things that a child of 12 or 13 can imagine.
Yeah.
It's unique to that child. It isn't the same from child to child. We're not looking to try to all be the same. That's the collectivist spirit. That's what's destroying society. We're looking to go just the opposite way, the uniqueness of each individual and his or her own imagination. So a child of 11 or 12 or 13 whose imagination is still alive has absolute confidence in the idea that what they are conceiving of and dreaming of and envisioning and imagining could possibly come true in the world at some future time, and that they could be involved actively in making it happen. Now, what I've discovered from many years of experience myself and from working with other people is that you can't say in advance, well, here's the possible realm of solutions that could be imagined. That's impossible. It's all unpredictable. You don't know. Just people think they know. They say, well, there's only 3 things we can do here, and this is what they are. No, that's conventional mind at work. Imagination, unfettered, unleashed, would say there's 150 things we could do here, and 147 of them haven't even been dreamed up yet. And with the power, energy, will, and so forth, these things could change society, change the world completely. So multiply that 12-year-old child by, let's say, 100 million 12-year-olds, each of whom has his or her own very, very active imagination. And then consider the idea, which I think many people have experienced at one moment or another in their own lives, that when they do come upon that kind of inner vision in their imaginations of some extraordinary possibility that could be placed into the world, they get an influx of enormous energy that was just latent and just there somewhere out in the boondocks has suddenly arrived on a freight train, and they feel that enormous kind of inspiration and energy to do something different with their lives, something revolutionary that they've never thought of before. Well, that's what we're talking about here. Now, that's the thing that cannot be stopped in the long run. That can never be totally drummed out of people. That can never be taken away. That's what all the mind control is about, to try to stuff that back down. But ultimately, it doesn't work. So that's what exiting from the matrix is all about, is following that road instead of the road of, well, things look horrible and here's what I know and this is all we can do and that's not going to work because of this. And so there we are.
There's too many possibilities.
Yeah.
And they're always being born. And the path that we're all on, this globalist path that is, depressing people and making them feel defeated, is the same path. It's the same idea, decade in, decade out, when you have all of these other ideas and inventions coming from the next generation and our generation that can eventually overwhelm this old path.
You bet. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jon Rappoport, for joining me on my first show here.
Thanks, John. It was great to be here.
You can find Jon Rappoport at nomorefakenews.com. And be sure to check out his astounding techniques to open up your creativity with his Exit from the Matrix Revealed, and Power Outside the Matrix series. Thanks for joining me on this maiden voyage of Lest We Forget. I just want you to know that I'm a proud American. I do not hold any political affiliation, libertarian, Democratic, or Republican. I consider myself a concerned American, and it is my duty as a reporter and a journalist to bring you the news that many sources would just bury and forget about the importance of these issues as our day-to-day moves forward into the future. Thanks again for listening. I'm John Bound, and I'll see you next Friday. Please subscribe at dailynewscollective.com.